Hello everyone and welcome back to the Great Book of Grudges. My name is Nathan and it's finally time. I have literally waited years to play as a Slaaneshi faction with Slaaneshi demons and seekers, and yeah, there's a lot to talk about in this video. So as always, everything that you're seeing here is early in development and so on, so some stuff can change. And as always, anything that has spoilers, because we have the cinematics back as I finally had my PC fixed, it's been a while, those will be in the YouTube chapter section, so if you want to avoid any spoilers you can, but there's a lot to talk about mechanics and gameplay and so much, so let's not waste any more time and jump right in. Just a little heads up, yes, I'm going to put the intro cinematic so you can skip that just below as usual. I just want to make sure so nobody gets spoiled because, you know.
It was in the Palace of Ruin I found KARI, the Keeper of Secrets. His den of excess was no place for mortals. With every step it whispered promises of all I desire. Like others before me, my soul yearned to be ensnared. But I knew if I succumbed here, he would own me for eternity. I made my revelations quickly, before my senses gave way. Yet KARI found the tale of Be'lakor and Ursun tiresome. It was a secret he kept already. As my mind clouded, I made a final gambit. I would guide him through the maelstrom to the bear's deathbed.
The bear is tempting.
The sorrow of a dying god, yours to treasure.
A treasure to cherish. I want it. You will give it to me.
One drop of Ursun's blood. That is my fee.
Advise me well, and you will have your desire. Fail me, and I will have your soul.
Our task is to reap the sorrow of a dying god. Ursun's anguish, collected and treasured for eternity.
Well, that definitely sets the mood, and we start off in the Palace of Ruin, which is actually in the far left-hand corner, top left-hand corner of the map, meaning that you can pretty much monitor when your enemies are coming for you. You start off at war with a few factions, Skarbrand, another minor Khornate faction, and a minor Chaos Warrior faction, but other than that, you can pretty much prepare yourself without too much of an issue. There's not too many enemies around, potential enemies that is, unless you so wish. This is a very different campaign, as Slaanesh's forces focus around a lot of different style of play than you've already seen to the other factions. It makes them quite unique in their own right. Where you'll have a heavy focus on diplomacy, believe it or not, and also you won't be too expansionist at the very beginning, as there's a few things that you need to do to be able to secure your power. But before anything, let's start off with the unique faction effects known as the Arch-Tempter, diplomatic relations plus 20 with all factions, and finally tribute from vassals plus 50%. It might not sound very impressive, believe me, at the beginning I didn't think so, but as you start progressing through the campaign and making use of all the Slaaneshi mechanics, you'll realize that firstly, diplomatic relations can be very, very useful. It doesn't matter too much on the difficulty, as you have another few ways to kind of boost that, and then obviously the tribute from vassals will make more sense a little bit later down the line in this video. KARI's own unique trait is known as Seductive, which has the following benefits. Experience gain plus 50% each time a new faction is fought in battle. This means that if you can keep KARI being very mobile, going to different locations, fighting many minor factions and so on, you're going to be able to power level him up very, very quickly. That's pretty much how I've been playing myself. Especially if you use the demon portals to kind of jump into different locations. It can be very useful and you'll end up with a max level KARI very, very quickly. Next is Seduce unit costs minus 25%. We'll go into the whole Seduce unit mechanic very, very soon. And finally, enemy leadership minus 4 or in local region. Quite useful regardless of whatever difficulty you might be playing, so you've got a few benefits here, especially to boost him up to make him quite a powerhouse. Skill-wise, he's got everything that you can imagine in terms of the generic skills. You know, all the usual boost up your warrior's capabilities, reduce upkeep, and all that different type of stuff. He's also got access to the lore of Slaanesh, which is a fairly good lore of magic. I'll have a video on that very soon detailing all its uses and so on, but it pairs very well with his stats. As you can see, he's got a lot of HP because he's a big monster, very little army because pretty much all he's wearing is a bikini, but he's very, very fast. This is a very big benefit to the whole Slaaneshi army, especially as their legendary lord keeps up with them too. 100 speed is nothing to sniff at. He's also quite the good melee fighter too, able to take on bloodthirsters without too much of an issue. His speed just works out so well as you're going to be able to just run after a big monster and pin it down. Plus, if you need to run away from a specific area or get into a different vantage point to cast spells, your speed will allow that too. It's great stats all around for this character. Obviously, he does have a unique skill line as you can see on screen, which makes him have a few different hexes which can be quite powerful against your enemy. You can also increase his speed even further. There's a few skill points which will allow for that, and he basically zooms across the battlefield. It's something really impressive to see. There's other stuff focused around diplomacy, being able to have Sophoric Musk and a few other things. It's a good skill line. It's very different to what most people might be used to, but then keep in mind that the Slaaneshi faction is very, very different. So you want an all-rounder, especially diplomacy is going to be very useful here. At rank 10, you'll be able to gain access to his special item, the Wilt Stealer's Sword. You'll have to do a quest battle for it, but it's not too difficult as you can imagine, as it's fairly early on into your campaign. The sword itself has some pretty good stats, as you can see. Extra money from post-battle loot is going to be very, very useful. The increased weapon strength, the ability, and also being able to spread much more Slaanesh corruption. It's a good item all around for a Slaaneshi faction, that's for sure. So like every other Chaos Monogod faction, you have access to Unholy Manifestations, which you will only have access to one at the very beginning. The rest you'll need to start getting more and more Slaanesh corruption across the campaign map itself. Now you're going to be the main reason why this corruption is spreading. Unlike, say for example, the other Monogods, the Slaaneshi factions, the minor ones at the very least, will start dying out fairly soon. One's right next to Scarbrand and so on, so yeah, they're not in the best place. But that's perfectly fine, as there's loads of other ways through other mechanics to be able to spread corruption, so you're not too much of a deficit, just don't expect them to be able to help you. The benefits here are quite useful, as you can see, but it might take a while to be able to start getting them. That's the main thing. Now let's talk about technology. So technology is a little bit small when it comes to Slaanesh, as you have 6 different branches with 6 different techs. It's based on Slaanesh's sacred number, and each of them will focus on different things. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to let it play out. You can listen to the game and so on, and just see what everything is, as each section is dedicated to something completely different. Construction for Slaaneshi factions is done in a very traditional sense. You can see that the units are spread out quite heavily with 3 different basic military buildings and 3 different advanced military buildings. However, as you can see, it's not like, say, for example, Nurgle, which requires something completely different and so on. Everything here is standard. You've got a infrastructure building focused around corruption, another one around money. 2 of them are revolving around growth, and growth is very important for Slaanesh because you are the weakest in terms of squishiness. Now, you're very fast and you can do loads and loads of damage, but if you get bogged down too quickly, they will destroy you, which is why you need to grow quick. You need to be able to get access to those really, really good units as fast as possible. So you've got access to 2 different growth buildings, and you'll be able to make use of it through all your different settlements. So your campaigns themselves will see your settlements and your provinces expand rather rapidly. It's never too early to start recruiting a second army, especially with the Heralds of Slaanesh. You have access to 2 different types, one with the Law of Shadow or one with the Law of Slaanesh. Both of them have a lot of different things you can see from their traits and so on, but the main thing is you'll want to focus on them as a spellcaster yet very fast moving character. Keep in mind that they can also have access to a lot of different things here. Everything is as usual with the generic skills, as you can imagine. Their stats are pretty good. They've got pretty good movement speed. They're on foot, by the way, at the very beginning, so they're able to move around fairly quickly. Obviously low armor and so on, but they're not there to do loads of damage up front. They're a flanking character. The Slaaneshi playthrough is going to be very different to what you're normally used to, even if you've been playing Total War for quite some time now. Now, when it comes to unique skills, they do have access to the Locus as every other Herald does, but these are focused in a more Slaaneshi sense. You can get some decent hexes, you can get some decent buffs. There is one which is really, really good. That's the Locus of Grace, which can make your Slaaneshi stuff very tanky, and it's going to be needed in certain occasions. That itself grants plus 24 melee defense and plus 22% physical resistance. Very, very useful for demons who already have a natural physical resistance, and it's area of effect, so you're going to be able to use it quite well. You've also got access to the Steed of Slaanesh, the Seeker Chariot of Slaanesh, and the Exalted Seeker Chariot of Slaanesh. Yeah, you're going to be moving with either chariots or demonic horses. That's the best way to explain them. Well, anteaters? Demonic horse anteaters? Yeah. Like I said before, Slaanesh is about speed, and you've got this here. It's focused around either with speed by itself, with a small entity in a sense, or you can have a very powerful chariot that's built to rip apart enemies, but you're a bit of a bigger target. It's very much dependent on what your playstyle is and so on, but all of them have worked out quite well from my experience, as I've been using them quite often. I am not afraid to admit that I've already done about 4 campaigns with KARI, but let's not stay here too long, as there's still a lot more to discuss. Of course, when you look towards your hero choices, you have one of them being the Allurus, which is your Demonette hero. These have access to either the Law of Shadows or the Law of Slaanesh, and has access to the same Locus abilities and the same mount options as the Herald, which means, once again, very, very mobile and a powerful caster too. You're mixing up 2 very, very good things together. One thing I like to do is have 2 more Alluruses in my army so I can make sure I have access to all the different Locus if I want, or if I'm going for something really punchy, just everything with the Locus of Grace. Again, that's obviously more focused around your playstyle, but I've been playing very aggressively, and sometimes a little bit of defense does help. So we're going to talk about diplomacy, and it might not be the way you expect it to be. So you'll see that this Norscan has initiated that they want a trade agreement. Something very different here that you'll notice is that their port hall has a Mark of Slaanesh. This is because of a unique Slaaneshi mechanic, which is rather detailed. We're going to go through it now, but the mechanic itself is only active to humans, elves, and beastmen. Yes, any type of humans and any type of elves. While there might not be elven factions, barring one wood elf faction at the moment, I mean, this already gives us a nice little push as to how the campaign is going to play when eventually we have a combined map. So everything you see here is focused around something known as seductive influence. That's the mark itself, which fills up in a clockwise way. It's based on different factors. Seduction itself is gained by battling these factions, diplomacy with these factions, some other different types of stuff like events and so on, Slaaneshi corruption, cult creations, and even the gift of Slaanesh. We'll be going over this very, very soon. Now, they do have some resistance, for example, number of settlements, other, which is obviously events and so on, and racial resistance. So in a way, you're building up a separate type of relation bar in a sense. but there's a few benefits and so on attached to it. So, for example, you can see here that when they are suspicious, 0 to 24%, leadership +2 when fighting against Slaaneshi factions for all armies, meaning that every human, beastmen, and elf faction is stronger against you at the very beginning. When they are curious, like the first time you opened up incognito mode, that's around 25% to 49%, you now start to see more benefits. They will start to suffer diplomatic relations -10 with Khornate factions, diplomatic relations +10 with Slaaneshi factions, Slaanesh corruption +1 for all provinces that they own, leadership -4 when fighting against Slaaneshi factions, all armies, and finally resistance to seduction +25%. These will start expanding more and more, and you'll notice that this will help you if you start doing this to, say, for example, Order-Tide factions in the future. When they're tempted, which is 50% to 74%, they'll have the following effects. Diplomatic relations -20 with Khornate factions, diplomatic relations +20 with Slaaneshi factions, Slaanesh corruption +2 for all provinces, leadership -8 when fighting against Slaaneshi factions for all armies, and finally resistance to seduction +50%. Now, it's very important to note here that if you're going to be working with the Norscan factions, trying to seduce them and so on, you're going to want to try and take out Skarbrand very, very early. This is a mistake I made in my first campaign, where obviously you can see that they'll start getting worse and worse diplomatic relations with them, and then Skarbrand decided to just go on some sort of blood crusade. When they're enthralled, which is 74 to 99%, they'll have the following effects. Diplomatic relations -30 with Khornate factions, diplomatic relations +30 with Slaaneshi factions, Slaanesh corruption +3 for all provinces that they control. As you can see, this is probably going to be one of the best ways for you to gain more Slaanesh corruption as a whole. Leadership -12 when fighting against Slaaneshi factions, all armies, and resistance to seduction +100%. And finally, when they're at 100%, which is enthralled, they'll have the following effects. Non-playable factions are now vulnerable to forced vassalization. Yeah, you can vassalize pretty much every human, elf, or beastman faction that you may find. The beastmen are not so much useful. Diplomatic relations -40 with Khornate factions, this is where Skarbrand starts doing his thing. Diplomatic relations +40 with Slaaneshi factions, Slaanesh corruption +4 for all provinces, very, very useful benefits there. Leadership -16 when fighting against Slaaneshi factions, all armies, and finally resistance to seduction -100%. Now you're probably wondering, if you vassalize them, then what's the point of the minus leadership? This is pretty much the deal with the Order-Tide. That's the way I'm thinking about it. Obviously we still have to wait till the combined map and so on, so I can probably test that out, but it kind of makes sense. Since the Order-Tide itself usually consists of the Empire, Bretonnia, the High Elves, the Wood Elves, and so on, obviously this won't be useful against the Dwarfs, but you can already start taking out some strong contenders and have very powerful benefits against them, because -16 leadership is very, very good. Now, there's two things to discuss. Firstly, yes, non-playable factions, so you can't dominate Karl Franz, but you can start dominating other factions, some minor factions and so on, to be able to turn them against the Empire, turn them against Bretonnia, turn them against Tyrion, you know? You can still get those minor factions, and it'll only cost you a certain number of devotees. This, of course, requires 100% too, but it's not that difficult to do if you, say, for example, start moving around and planning how to do corruption. Obviously, you have your own unique Slaaneshi commandments when you take over a province. This will be either spreading corruption, extra growth, it very much depends on your playstyle. I will say that the growth one is probably the most useful, as you'll want to be able to expand as quickly as possible, like I said before, to get the better units, but also because it will make getting your cults a little cheaper, which, believe me, if you want to start using the vacillation stuff and seduction and so on, you're going to want cheap cults, because you're going to want to spread them as much as possible. Your unique resource is devotees, and they're used in practically everything that you do, but they're also gained through that way too. So as you can see from the description, it's pretty much used in, well, everything. This is the thing. And it's not very easy to come by devotees at the very beginning, but as you progress through your campaign, you'll start getting more and more and more. As you can see, buildings get them, captives, events, vassalized factions, pleasurable acts, raiding, pretty much anything can get them, and they're consumed by events, faction vassalization, pleasurable acts again, cults, disciple armies. It's something that you're going to keep an eye on, because it's one of those resources which you might not notice ticking up at the very beginning, but you'll certainly start to notice it ticking down when you need it for something specific. So since Slaaneshi corruption needs to be spread so heavily, you are able to form some cults. This is once again a throwback to that special commandment which reduced their price. You can see here that it's rather expensive, pretty much all my devotees are going straight into that at the very beginning, but it has a chance of establishing up to 3 different cults throughout the lands of humans, and soon enough elves eventually when we get a combined map. Unfortunately for me, because it happens every time I want to showcase something, only 1 cult appeared and it was very, very close in Serpent Jetty. I've actually had some of them spawning up in Grand Cafe, but you know, sod's law, it has to happen when I'm recording. Cults themselves have a variety of different uses. Not only are they a great way of getting more devotees, so you're spending devotees to gain devotees, kind of sounds like a gamble, but it's not, but you can also get diplomatic relations, you can even get some seduction going. It very much depends on what exactly you want it for, though I must say that getting more devotees from it is probably the best one. I've actually have a campaign at the moment where multiple different areas are just feeding me devotees constantly, and it's between the lands of Grand Cafe, which is mostly safe from enemies, so I know my cults won't get destroyed by random ogres coming in and so on. There's also other ways of getting more devotees, like for example looting and occupying, sacking, or subjugating a faction the old-fashioned way by taking them down to 1 settlement. That will give you the biggest return, though this was in an area that I wanted, so I wasn't going to do that. Despite the fact that I would have wanted those, it's just, you know, I want to build up a base of operations to be able to start recruiting some Keeper of Secrets, some Fiends, and so on. Mind you, I have done this in another playthrough where I have teleported KARI to the lands of the Empire, and what I was doing is fighting those minor factions in that area to power level up KARI, but also get a lot of devotees just by subjugating the minor factions. Enemy armies that you defeat or have agents do something against them will also get the gift of Slaanesh, because, you know, Slaanesh is a very generous god, and this will give you benefits to you, basically, not to them, which is seduce unit cost minus 10% for local enemy armies, devotees 5 per turn to the faction that provided the gift of Slaanesh, Slaanesh corruption plus 5 in local province, and seduction influence plus 3 per turn for the character's faction. So you're building up with quite a lot of stuff that you already use anyway, plus extra corruption. You'll be able to maybe vassalize this faction if you don't want to just destroy them outright. It's every mechanic working together in tandem, which is what makes Slaanesh quite unique. You do have access to another generic hero choice, which is obviously the Cultist of Slaanesh. Now, this is rather different, as the cultists have always been quite stylized in a sense. The Cultist of Slaanesh is obviously no different, where you're going to use it as a melee fighter. It's more useful as an agent in all honesty, but being able to summon in demonettes and eventually even a Keeper of Secrets is very powerful. They're not too fast, which is... yeah, they're still fast, but when you compare them with Slaaneshi stuff, they're not really that fast, so they can fall behind even on their Chaos Steed. Don't get me wrong, they're still useful because they're quite decent in melee combat, and they are quite good at taking out enemy heroes, but they've got a better use, in my opinion at the very least, where they can form cults without needing to use devotees. It'll only cost you some of your treasury, so I've been using that for that, sending them far and wide, be able to start cults in different locations. It's fairly useful as long as enemy agents don't start aiming for them. Let's move on to seducing units. So enemies will come and attack you in different locations. I'm right now in the realm of Khorne, and obviously they're going to be quite aggressive. So I'm able to seduce enemy units to join my forces. This is rather different, as obviously this means that you can get a lizard men in your army, you can get a dragon ogre, you can get pretty much anything. They're only there for that match, however, so after the fight is done, they just kind of disappear. There's a limit in terms of how much you can spend, because these units do cost money to be able to seduce. However, you can increase that limit with various different factors such as technology and so on, so you can eventually get some rather powerful units in your rank, and you can be quite the hindrance to different enemies, as you can take away 2 units, sometimes even more. Not only that, but you can take away some of their powerful units, which might make them weaker, you a little bit stronger, as you can then hybridize with your army. As far as I can see, you're able to use this on practically any faction that you see, or any army and so on, as somehow we're able to seduce undead stuff, which I don't know how that works, because you know. So this scenario allows me to showcase something else. I now have a undefended location and Skarbrand is getting very, very close to attacking me. Unfortunately, which I tried to attempt anyway, is building up another army, but I know that he's gonna basically encircle the area, so I'm not gonna be able to get any troops. I am gonna have a lot of issues here. I don't want to lose this location mainly because I don't want Skarbrand to have an extra footing against me, as I've been focusing on other stuff rather than just dealing with him, which I should have very early on. Now obviously he's going to want to try and starve me out, so he's waiting, and that gives me turns to move down armies. I've got one on the way, but it's mostly just full of marauders. Yes, they're not bad units, but it's not going to help against Skarbrand. Now there is a new mechanic in play known as Summon Disciple Army, which for devotees you're able to summon in an army right there and then. At the beginning they aren't really great, it depends, it's kind of randomized, so sometimes you'll get some really good units. I got some decent ones here, but they come in with full movement, they don't cost any upkeep barring your lord, and you can use them for battles. Now, they can't regenerate, they can't replenish. As soon as they're pretty much useless, you can just disband them and go, but this makes sure that I have better forces to fight against Skarbrand, and making sure that I have pretty much anything I need, because he's got his special items. I need to be geared to fight him, I need to be able to fight and win. It is very important to note, however, that you can only summon disciple armies in areas with a decent amount of Slaaneshi corruption, so you can't just summon it right outside enemy territory and so on if there's nothing there. Something also rather unique to Slaaneshi factions is that you can create a vassal. If you go to the former areas where minor factions might have had their capitals, like for example there was a Slaaneshi faction here, but I've been able to do this with minor chaos factions too, you can then create them, getting a large amount of devotees, some replenishment, and a vassal, so you can get some benefits from that too. It's caught me by surprise at the first time, and I must admit that I didn't use it a lot, but nowadays I'm using it when I start dealing with minor chaos factions closer to Kairos and so on, if I want to get myself a foothold, but I want an ally to defend the areas if I'm working towards somewhere else. Now, as we near the end of this video, obviously as per usual, your heralds can then turn into exalted greater demons, with the herald of Slaanesh being able to turn into an exalted keeper of secrets. Now, normally I'd say that this might not be needed too much and so on, but you don't have a flying herald, so the exalted keeper of secrets might be even better here. As you can see, stats all around are really good. They're still very, very fast. They're not as fast as a chariot, but you can kind of buff that up a little bit anyway to keep them more or less on par. Now, you've also got some unique skills up there too, which will give you some different benefits, and some powerful ones too. Ballet of Blows is one which is an augment, increases base weapon damage and armor-piercing weapon damage and melee attack, but goes into different phases. This makes them, well, pretty much bloodthirster killers. The Exalted Greater Demons for the Slaaneshi faction are just really good, and they're very fun to use, especially since you've also got access to your two different laws of magic depending on what you exalted. And finally, we're getting to the end of this video. There'll be another one very shortly after this one, which will focus around the full roster, the stats, and my personal thoughts regarding each unit. But until then, we're going to look at the quest battle revolving around his special item. I'm going to have the cinematic play, and then I'm going to talk about the Slaaneshi playthrough as a whole. So there's a lot to talk about campaign-wise and so on. These are my personal thoughts regarding it, how I found it and so on. It's just very nice also just to be able to fight high elves too, because obviously KARI hates elves. Like, high elves even more so than anything else. So being able to fight against some high elves, a pretty decent stack in all honesty, because it's all anti-large, they've got Sisters of Avalon and so on. At least it gives you a fight to, well, test your mettle against them, and it'll leave you wanting more for the combined map when we can finally invade Ulf-1 and set it all on fire. God, I can't wait for that.
You are in my way, Asa. Move aside, and I may grant you a gift rarely bequeathed on my other playthings. A quick and only mildly painful death. What vexes me, and the agonies I shall visit upon you and your descendants will be as legend, sung in the halls of the Marcher Fortress for eternity. Bring them to me, my fiends. The feast begins. This will do.
Right, it's been a rather exciting day, but by the time that this video finishes, there should also be the Slaanesh roster video, so there's a lot to discuss. There's lots of Slaanesh today. There'll also be me streaming a little bit after these videos come out too. Anyways, regarding the Slaanesh campaign, it's very different, even with the army and so on. Keep in mind that if you're not used to like skirmishing warfare and so on, you're going to have a hard time. Everything you have is squishy, but it's able to do damage. This is how it was in the tabletop, so this is kind of how I expected the army to be here too. Your Slaaneshi characters, your Slaaneshi warriors, everything can do damage. It can dish it out, no problem, if you're attacking from the flank and if you're attacking from the rear. If you're not used to that, you're going to have a bad time. However, it's very simple to get used to if you mix up with, say, for example, the Marauders, and you use them a lot more than you would expect. Yes, they're low tier, but they can be very useful, even in late game. Mechanic-wise, everything worked out quite well. I had fun with it at the very least. I thought it was very stylized, and it's obviously very focused on everything Slaaneshi. Do I think that the faction could benefit from some stuff in the future? Yes, and I will talk about that later on in another day, but so far I still think that they're still relatively strong. You can get a lot of devastating charges in with, say, for example, Hellflayers or even some Heartseekers. They were rather surprising in my playthroughs, in all honesty. KARI as a character, I hadn't really been too keen on at the very beginning when they announced him, but I've definitely warmed up to him, especially with how quick he is. I wasn't expecting a character to be able to zoom across the battlefield that quickly, just with not only the 100 speed, but when you get a few bonuses in, he can get to like 125 or something. He literally just zooms across. Not only that, but mobilizing that with a highly mobile army, you're able to run circles around your enemy. Like I said, you're squishy, but if they can't catch you, they can't damage you. Yes, arrows and all that will be a thing, but you have a high physical resistance with the demons. Your humans, not so much, but they do have shields, so they kind of deflect and so on. It's definitely a difficult campaign to get used to, but if you can more or less play skirmishing style, especially with a lot of hit and run tactics and so on, you won't really have too much of an issue. The campaign itself is as slow as you want it to be. I think that's the best way to describe it. You can take a while and build up your settlements and so on, get some higher tier units, or very early on you can start to meet your enemies head on with a line of Marauders holding the front line, and then, say for example, Demonettes charging from the flank and the rear, because they'd be able to. They are quite quick. They are really, really quick. That's pretty much everything I want to say. The roster video will go into detail regarding all of the different units individually and their uses and so on, and yeah, there's going to be a lot of Slaaneshi stuff. Anyways, there will be a stream tonight too if you're curious to see Slaanesh in action. I have been waiting years for this, like I said earlier on, and yeah, it's been a good day. It's been a good day. But let me know what you guys think about Slaanesh's forces, KARI, and the campaign in general in the comments below, and let's start a bit of a discussion. But with that, my friends, we've come to the end of our video. Thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy the video, might I suggest giving the video a like, or even subscribing to the channel, as it really does help us out. In the description section below are various links to different social media platforms such as Facebook, Instagram, and Discord. Also in the description section is an affiliate link with Element Games where you could buy loads of hobby-based products, not just Warhammer, for 10 to 25% off. Making a purchase using that link and also our special code, which is also in the description, supports the channel at no extra cost to you, which we think is rather cool. A big thank you to our patrons. Your support means the world to us. It's amazing that people want to help a small channel like us grow and get to a higher level of content. A big thank you to Gibraltar LUSC, Ryan Bertsche, Andrew Prince, and Okro for subscribing to us at our Fane level. You guys are super cool. And a big thank you to Edward Yule, VS Vasan, Aaron Whitman, and Shaggy for subscribing to us at our King level. Honestly, we can't thank you all enough. And lastly, a big thank you to all of you for liking, sharing, and commenting on these videos. Honestly, it's because of you guys that the channel's been growing at such a great pace lately, so we can't thank you all enough. But with that, my friends, thank you so much for watching once again, and we shall see you all again very, very soon. Have a good day.